My wife hates it. I love eating tofu.
I like meat.
Don't get me wrong. I love meat. Big meat.
I don't think I've ever had
Tofu's good though. You make it right. If you make it right. All right. So let's finish talking about imperialism, and we had gotten to the war with Spain. Yes. How the war with okay. So all right. So we're looking at this, and it kind of centers over Cuba. And the Cuban sugar market and American tariffs and all that. And really what it boils down to is Jose Marti trying to convince the American people that there's something rotten going on in Cuba and that maybe the Americans should intervene on behalf of the Cuban people. We are recording, correct? Mm-hmm. Hi, Rachel. How are you? Rachel Servoff is going to be watching these, so. Hope you're feeling better. Anyway, so Jose Marti, all right, the George Washington of Cuba, if you will, trying to convince the American people that Valeriano Weyler, the Spanish Governor General, the Generalissimo of Cuba, is a bad guy. And he does this by using the newspapers in America to try to sway public opinion. That's the role of Pulitzer and Hearst and yellow journalism, sensational headlines, to try to sell to the American people that what is going on in Cuba is horrific. I mean, my God, look at the pictures. It's horrible, isn't it? The devastation, the depravity, the naked women being strip searched by, Spanish beasts. All of this is an attempt to cater to a very low-cultured, broad audience, what today I would call the low-information voter, the average American who just takes what the news gives them and doesn't think about it too much. Ooh, well, the news told me that's bad, so I guess it's bad. The low information voter. Yeah, now 115, 120 years ago, you still had low information voters. And guys, these images are going to sway American public opinion. You've got a lot of middle-class do-gooders out there in the late 19th century who are itching to fix problems. They're itching to fix alcohol. They're itching to fix, orphans. They're itching to fix poverty in the inner city. They're itching to fix political corruption. And they look at this and they're itching to fix international problems as well. To me, imperialism is just progressivism in foreign policy. The willingness to use government to fix problems. You do that at home, it's called progressivism. You do that abroad, it's imperialism. Because that is the goal here, right? That we should do something, we should help these people, we should fix this problem. Now, Cleveland, who is president when all this starts coming out in 1895, 96, I mean, he's in the last year or so of his presidency, he generally wants to stay out of Cuba. He doesn't think it's our business. He thinks we may get drawn into a broader conflict for which America is not ready and America should not get involved in. But McKinley is a dope. He's not a broad thinker. And he gets suckered in by these images, by these headlines. And, William Randolph Hearst, if you've ever seen the movie Citizen Kane, anybody ever seen the movie Citizen Kane? Okay. That is based on the life of William Randolph Hearst. Yes, exactly. And so when Citizen Kane, when he says, you provide the pictures, I'll provide the war, it is this idea of manufacturing a crisis that may or may not exist for the purpose of selling news. You think the news doesn't do that today? You think MSNBC and Fox News, and to a lesser extent CNN, doesn't practice that today? Let's find the most sensational stuff, latch onto it, and exploit it for a couple of news cycles to get people to watch? Well, they don't have TV back then. They got newspapers. So how are we going to get people to buy newspapers? I know. Let's sell them depravity. Let's sell them sex. Let's sell them blood. People like that stuff. They eat it up with a spoon. So poor old Frederick Remington, who is an artist down in Cuba, radios back to Hearst, hey, Hearst, there's nothing going on down here. Hearst famously says, man, just provide the pictures. I'll provide the war. Because ultimately, war is going to sell newspapers. So how does the war with Spain begin? It begins with two incidents. To a lesser degree, the publication of something called the Delome letter in the newspapers, which the newspapers take and run with. Apparently, the Spanish ambassador to the United States, a guy by the name of Enrique Dupuy de Lome, wrote a letter back to the Spanish government giving his assessment of William McKinley. Basically, he called William McKinley weak. Said, you know, and the quote is that he was weak and a bitter for the affections of the crowd. Basically, what that says is, this is how William McKinley governed. Which way are the public winds blowing? Oh, I'll go that way, because that's what the people want. He doesn't really have a political backbone. Well, now, Teddy Roosevelt, who is the Undersecretary of the Navy for William McKinley, had famously said of his boss that he had the backbone of a chocolate eclair. So, I mean, I don't know what's worse, a foreign diplomat insulting the president or one of the president's underlings insulting the president. Either way, it's not really good for William McKinley's character. But, and yes, the newspapers try to drum up a lot of, here's a fancy word for you, jingoism. Jingoism is over-the-top patriotism. That whole America attitude, that's jingoism. It's over-the-top patriotism, okay? Out of bounds patriotism. When you start watching Fox News loves to practice jingoism. You know, they've got the eagles flying and the stars all over the place, and America's the greatest country in the face of the planet that ever existed, eversies. That's jingoism. Okay, it's a little bit over the top. It may be. I love living here. I love America. Please don't come after me with your drones, Mr. President. But when people get out of control with the flag waving and the fireworks and the America can do no wrong attitude, that's jingoism. That's over the top. Okay? And the Delome letter inspires a lot of that jingoism. But it's the explosion of a United States battleship in Spanish-controlled waters that really pushes it over the edge. The USS Maine was sent to Havana Harbor on a fact-finding mission to see what was going on in Cuba. McKinley wanted to know, is this really happening? And so the Maine parks itself in Havana Harbor. A couple of nights later, the friggin' ship explodes. Yeah, with the bodies flying. I love the bodies flying up in the air. No, but the newspapers ran with that and said, well, obviously the Spanish had to have done it. It's an American ship in Spanish waters. We've been critical of the Spanish, and these duplicitous along and blown up our battleship. And that is the reason why we declare war on Spain, the explosion of the Maine. Now, 10 years later, they did an investigation and discovered it was an accident. But that's okay. The newspapers rushed to judgment. I've never heard that before either. So war was declared. Now, there were those in the American public who believed that we may be rushing into a war that we should not be getting into. A lot of people believe that this was somehow cooked up in an attempt to get America to acquire colonies around the globe. And the American government said, no, that's not the case at all. As a matter of fact, we're going to add on to the war declaration an amendment that promises that we are not in this to acquire territory. We are only going into this war for the noble purpose of providing Cuba its independence. Cross our heart. It is called the Teller Amendment, and that is what the government tells the American people. The Teller Amendment. We're not going in this for an empire. We're going to provide Cuba its independence. Now, the war itself, it's one of those wars that America loves to fight. It's what Secretary of State John Hay referred to as a splendid little war. Why? It lasts 4 months. There's very few casualties. We lose, very few people, and we get lots of stuff in the end. Those are the kind of wars we love. It's fought over a summer, over a spring and summer in 1898. It takes place in 2 places, in the Philippines and in Cuba. And the only reason the freaking war lasts 4 months is it takes a while for the fleet to get from the Philippines to Cuba. It's a quick victory, very few deaths. As a matter of fact, most of the deaths among American soldiers in the Spanish-American War did not come from Spanish bullets. Came from malaria and food poisoning. Improperly processed meat that was provided to the soldiers. That's going to open up an investigation later on. We'll take a look at that. Find out the results of that meat investigation. There's some, look, the war doesn't go perfectly. There's some supply problems. I find this war interesting because this is the first war since the Civil War. So you've got Northerners and Southerners on the same side. You've also got white troops and black troops on the same side. So there's some racial infighting within the army. That's actually one of the biggest problems during the Spanish-American War, aside from the food poisoning, is the racial infighting between white and black troops. But in the end, we win. We get lots of stuff. We get the Philippines. We get Puerto Rico. You get Guam. You get de facto control of Cuba. USA! 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 America! Splendid little war, says Secretary of State John Hay, one of the few secretaries of state you actually need to know. Who else do we need to know? Thomas Jefferson was Washington's Secretary of State. He was the first Secretary of State. John Quincy Adams was James Monroe's Secretary of State, author of the Monroe Doctrine. So he's kind of important. William Seward was Lincoln and Andrew Johnson's Secretary of State and helped purchase Alaska, or Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, whatever it is. It's a test question for some reason. John Hay, who was McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt's Secretary of State. You're going to need to know perhaps John Foster Dulles, eventually, who is Eisenhower's Secretary of State, and not just because he has an airport named after him. And then you'll eventually need to know Henry Kissinger, who was Nixon and Ford's Secretary of State, ended the Vietnam War. All right. So, it's a splendid little war. And again, most of the deaths occur because of the spread of disease or yellow fever or malaria, which is spread by mosquitoes, and tainted meat. So how did we win? Well, the first step was to take the Philippines. And we took the Philippines because the Undersecretary of the Navy, Teddy Roosevelt, called up the Admiral of the Asian Fleet and said, proceed to Manila at once. Who the hell is Teddy Roosevelt to tell the Admiral of the Fleet to do anything? I thought that was the President's job. Isn't the President of the United States the Commander-in-Chief? Yeah, well, Teddy Roosevelt jumps the gun. Teddy Roosevelt issues a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Blatant breach of protocol. This is a blatant breach of protocol by ordering the fleet to Manila before the war had been declared, by the way. So as soon as the war was declared, there was the American fleet off the coast of the Philippines. We sailed right into Manila Bay, blew up the Spanish fleet. I think we lost one guy. We sunk every Spanish ship in the harbor. USA, USA, USA. Now, we decided to work with the Filipinos to defeat the Spanish. And the guy we linked up with in the Philippines was a man by the name of Emilio Aguinaldo. He's kind of the George Washington of the Philippines. There's a George Washington of everything, okay? He's kind of the George Washington of the Philippines, Emilio Aguinaldo. And we tell Aguinaldo, hey, work with us, and not only will we get rid of those pesky Spanish for you, but we'll grant you your independence. Cross our heart. And Aguinaldo says, yeah, man, I've been working on Filipino independence for years, and here come the Americans. You're saving us here. And as soon as we defeat the Spanish in the Philippines, we tell Aguinaldo, yeah, that promise we made, yeah, we're going to have to renege on that. See, we don't believe that you are capable of independence yet. We're going to need to stick around and guide you in your independence. And when the Filipinos decided that they were going to fight back against the Americans, the American attitude was, well, we just got done subjugating the Indians. How hard can it be to subjugate these guys? We looked at the Philippines and the subjugation of the Philippines very much the same way as the subjugation of the Native Americans. We've done it here in North America. Surely we can do it in Asia. McKinley famously saying that we were going to bring them Christianity, even though they had been Catholic for 400 years. They already knew the baby Jesus. It also speaks to just how dopey William McKinley was. So, the Spanish fleet is defeated at Manila. The fleet now has to make it all the way over to Cuba, which takes a while. When the fleet arrives in Cuba, the Spanish fleet in Santiago Harbor is destroyed. American troops land and occupy Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt famously leads the Rough Riders up San Juan Hill, plants the American flag, we win. USA! 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 Wait a minute, I thought Teddy Roosevelt was the Undersecretary of the Navy. How in the world is he charging up San Juan Hill? Because when the war started, Teddy Roosevelt resigned as Undersecretary of the Navy and formed his own army regiment. See, when you were back in the day, if you were rich enough and you had enough money, you could form your own army regiment. You just tell the army, I want to form my own regiment. I got the money. Here you go. And you could become a colonel. Teddy Roosevelt becomes an army colonel because he's got enough money to do it. And he calls up his buddies from college, his drinking buddies from college, and his drinking buddies from his cowboy days out in North Dakota, and says, hey guys, I'm forming a regiment. We're going to war. You want to join me? Yeah! And they're called the Rough Riders. And not only does he form his own regiment and have his uniform designed by Brooks Brothers, by the way, he also hires newspaper guys to follow the Rough Riders around. Again, he's got enough money to do it. And that's why everybody knows about Teddy Roosevelt, is because Teddy Roosevelt was his own best publicist. People back home are reading about the exploits of the Rough Riders because Teddy Roosevelt's got the newspaper guys on his payroll. So when the war is over, Teddy Roosevelt is able to take that fame and parlay it into political advancement. How so? In 1899, he's elected governor of New York. He comes in as governor and he says, I'm going to fix this place. We're going to make government more honest. We're going to clean up government. We're going to get rid of the political machines. I'm going to reform this. I'm going to reform that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to fix that. I'm going to fix that. And you know what happens to guys like that. No. He wanted to. He was going to do it. He was going to do it. But how do people normally, when a place is entrenched in the way they've always done things, and you get a guy who comes in with big ideas about change, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, what happens? People are going to resist it. Is there anything we can do to get this guy out of New York? Is there any place we can put this guy where he will stop trying to overturn the apple cart in New York and kind of get out of the way? What's the most useless job, to quote somebody famous, what's the most useless job ever conceived by the mind of man, politically? What? No. Close. No, he controls the money. We'll make him vice president. We'll promote him up and out. And so that's what they did. The Republicans in New York said, "Guys, you got to get rid of Teddy Roosevelt. He's a pain." And so they promoted him to vice president. There was an opening in 1900. The current vice president had died in 1899. Garrett Hobart. And so Teddy Roosevelt gets elected vice president in 1900, and then when William McKinley is assassinated the following year, he becomes president at the ripe old age of 42. That is a pretty remarkable trajectory there. Undersecretary of the Navy, colonel in the Army, governor of New York, vice president, president, all within the span of 3 years. Not bad. Not bad at all. I'm 43. What have I accomplished? Not as much as Teddy Roosevelt, that's for sure. No, God, no. You don't want that. That would be bad for everybody. I would immediately take over dictatorial powers.
Assuming we had the army back me up.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's right. I'd have to have the army to back me up. That's exactly right. I can make all the proclamations I want, but unless I got the army there. So the war is over. We signed the Treaty of Paris. Yes, another Treaty of Paris. Gesundheit. That is why when you talk about the Treaty of Paris, you need to make sure you're talking about the year of the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris 1763 that ends the French and Indian War is different than the Treaty of Paris 1783 that ends the American Revolution is different than the Treaty of Paris 1898 that ends the Spanish-American War. Yeah.
How many treaties of Paris are there?
4.
Why did they keep naming it the same?
Paris was the New York of its time. It was the cosmopolitan city. There was a time where French was really the lingua franca of the world. It was the language by which the rest of the world operated. Today, the lingua franca of the world is English. You go anywhere, people know English to a degree. Back then, back in the 17 and 1800s, French was the language that everybody knew. As a matter of fact, if anybody is ever looking to go into the diplomatic corps, you'd want to know French, along with English. French will get you into the State Department because it's still used. It's still one of the official languages of the United Nations. So the U.S. gets Guam and Puerto Rico. We take over the Philippines after promising to give them independence. We say that we're going to protect Cuba in what is known as the Platt Amendment. We had said we were going to give Cuba its independence, and we do, but it is conditional. The Cuban people may elect their own government, may elect their own parliament, may write their own constitution, but it is all subject to American approval. If we don't like their constitution, we will change it for them. If we don't like who they elect, we will replace them. So that's not really independence. Cuba becomes kind of a client state of the United States, what was called at the time a protectorate. And the reason why the United States is protecting Cuba and overseeing the Philippines, let's be honest. I mean, let's be totally upfront and honest here. It's completely racial. You people are too brown to govern yourselves, too foreign to govern yourselves. You can't possibly govern yourselves. You need us, the white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, Christian, superior democratic form of government that America has. You need us. McKinley, Albert Beveridge, all those guys that believe that stuff. There is a racial component to all of it. And now you begin having a debate over whether America should be governing colonies. This debate looks like this. On the one side, you've got the pro-imperialist argument. You've got William McKinley, Josiah Strong, Alfred Mahan, Teddy Roosevelt, the refreshing Albert Beveridge. And they argue that America needs to have colonies around the globe so that we can get access to Chinese markets, so that America can economically get out of the Depression of 1893, which it is still languishing in at the turn of the century. If we can find markets in China, if we can have colonies around the globe that will buy our crap, maybe that will spur economic growth. We need to keep an eye on Japan, because Japan's starting to exert itself in Asia at the turn of the century. In 1894, they had invaded China. Japan's a country on the move, a country on the make, and having the Philippines puts us in Japan's backyard. And the idea that the Filipinos are incapable of government, the Philippines are ours forever, as Senator Albert Beveridge so famously said. Not very refreshing. Now, on the flip side, you've got the Super Friends. Grover Cleveland, Andrew Carnegie, Samuel Gompers, Mark Twain, William Jennings Bryan, the Anti-Imperialist League. Meanwhile, back at the Hall of Justice. The Anti-Imperialist League, the problem with these guys is that they lacked focus. They had a lot of different reasons why America shouldn't get involved in imperialist ventures overseas. Some believed it was immoral, that it went against American values of democracy and freedom and justice and, the law. People like Samuel Gompers believed that this was a conspiracy to find cheap labor to undermine American unions and, have foreign labor take our jobs. Then there were those who feared that this might lead to interracial marriage. We can't have foreign people within the American sphere. It's going to lead to interracial intermingling. It will pollute the American gene pool. So they're not really focused. There are a lot of different reasons why we shouldn't get involved in imperialism, but the focus of the pro-imperialist folks is pretty direct. We need an empire to exert American force, promote American democracy, and expand trade. Americans can get behind that. In 1900, imperialism is the main issue in that election. It is a redo of the 1896 election between William Jennings Bryan, the Democrat, and William McKinley, the Republican. And instead of currency being the issue in 1896, in 1900, the issue is imperialism, and William McKinley wins with a larger majority in 1900, which generally says that in 1900, Americans supported that idea. Here's a good question. The Constitution follow the flag. What does that mean? I come into a place. I plant the American flag. You are now living under our flag. Does that mean that you are entitled to all the rights and privileges contained within the Constitution? Are you protected by the Constitution? Just because you live under the American flag? It's a great question. As a matter of fact, they asked that question in Puerto Rico and Guam, which are territories of the United States, but not necessarily equal territories to the United States. I know this looks like a lot, okay? Stop. All right? There's really only three things you need to worry about here. The Foraker Act, which basically is an act that says we're making Puerto Rico into a colony. The Jones Act makes Puerto Ricans citizens in 1917. Today, Puerto Ricans can come and go in the United States as they please. They are citizens of the United States. But between 1901 and 1917, the status of Puerto Ricans and people from Guam, Guamians? What would you call people from Guam? Guamians? Guamites? The status of those people is up in the air. Now, it's the Supreme Court who is going to make the ruling of what their status is. And in what is known as the insular cases, it's a series of lawsuits that claim that people living in Puerto Rico and Guam were not being given the equal rights in the Constitution the Supreme Court said that just because you live under the American flag does not guarantee that you get all the rights and privileges of being an American. The only way you get all the rights and privileges is by becoming a citizen. If you live in a territory and are not a citizen, you do not have the same rights. So the anti-imperialist folks say, well, look, you got one set of rules for one set of Americans and another set of rules for another set of Americans. Isn't that pretty much what the British did to us? Denied us our rights as Englishmen? Aren't we doing the same thing? And what really sparks the debate, I mean, this is really the thing that causes people to significantly question what it is we are doing and what it is we are becoming. In order to acquire and keep a territory, what is America willing to do? That is the question that arises when the Philippines rebel against the United States. We had promised them independence. We went back on that promise. They fought back. Should anybody be surprised? And what America winds up doing is becoming no better than the Spanish. We actually wound up using a lot of the torture techniques that the Spanish had been using on the Filipinos. America, for 4 years, has American troops in the Philippines. We actually lost over double the number of troops in the Philippines just securing them than we had lost in the Spanish-American War. It took 4 times as long and we lost over double the number of troops. And what are we doing? We're using torture. We're putting Filipinos in concentration camps. We're waterboarding them. The famous order that comes out during the insurrection from General Jacob Smith, kill everybody over 10. What are we becoming in order to have this territory? We're losing ourselves. Isn't America supposed to be special? Isn't America supposed to be exceptional? Isn't America supposed to do things in a way counter to all the other governments around the globe? That is the argument that is made. The public starts to sour on imperialism. Now, once the Philippines had been subjugated, Governor William Howard Taft is going to come in as the military governor named by Teddy Roosevelt. He's going to build schools and roads and infrastructure and a lot of things. He's generally credited with modernizing the Philippines. And eventually the Philippines are granted independence in 1947. But, I mean, this was a process, man. And why is America so gung-ho about having the Philippines? Because this is our ultimate goal. This is why you need to know who Secretary of State John Hay is, because this is his brainchild. We want Chinese markets open for American trade. Yes, we know Britain is there, we know France is there, we know Portugal is there, we know Japan is there, we know Russia is there. We know that China is divided into spheres of influence. But America wants to guarantee equal and open access to Chinese markets for trade. It is our ultimate goal. You know how the Monroe Doctrine and Washington's Farewell Address are cornerstone announcements of foreign policy in the 19th century? This is a cornerstone foreign policy in the early 20th century. It is what all things lead to. The open door. And even when the Chinese rise up and try to get rid of European and American influence, The Americans and the Europeans put aside their differences, band together, and squash the Chinese rebellion. It's called the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, and it refers to these Chinese nationalists who were trying to drive out foreign influence. They were referred to as the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. Boxers. But Hay and other Republicans believed that trade in Asia was the key to America's continued economic progress and growth. Therefore, acquiring Hawaii, instrumental in this. Acquiring Guam, instrumental in this. Acquiring the Philippines and keeping the Philippines, instrumental in this. Because we needed to be in the neighborhood. You've got all these countries fighting over China. We need to be there to oversee it, to referee it. Now, this policy of the open door is started by John Hay during the McKinley administration. McKinley believes in the open door. But McKinley was assassinated in September 1901, and Teddy Roosevelt assumes the presidency. Mark Hanna famously saying, now that damn cowboy is president. They promoted him to vice president, never expecting him to be president. And now here he is, president. And what Teddy Roosevelt is going to do, and the reason why Teddy Roosevelt's on Mount Rushmore, and the reason why everybody knows who Teddy Roosevelt is because Teddy Roosevelt is going to use the power of the presidency in a way that no president has done since Lincoln. He is going to use exertive executive power to fix problems here. It's called progressivism, and to promote American policy abroad. You can see him standing here next to a line of battleships. What's called the Great White Fleet. That Teddy Roosevelt is a subscriber to the Mahan thesis. He read it in the 1890s, believes in it wholeheartedly, and oversees the construction of a large, modern navy. Roosevelt's overall attitude toward foreign policy is referred to as big stick diplomacy. He quoted a famous African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick. What does that mean? Yeah. Think about it a little bit more. Yeah. Worse image? I don't know if it has anything to do with image, although it has to do with perception. Guy goes walking into a club. Okay? You're in a club, dancing, the music, the techno's playing. The guy bumps into you. And you immediately start getting in the guy's face. Hey, what are you doing bumping into me? Hey, what are you doing? And then all of a sudden the guy doesn't say anything. All he does is open his jacket. Now, Big Mouth, you want to continue running your lips? Speak softly and carry a big stick. I don't have to say anything. All I got to do is boop. Teddy Roosevelt opens his jacket, and he's got the Great White Fleet in there. Anybody wants to run their mouth about the United States? Fine, I got the Great White Fleet right here. That's big stick diplomacy. Today, we call it deterrence. Why do we have 4,000 nuclear weapons? It's enough to destroy the planet a couple times over, but why do we have it all? So nobody will screw with us. That's what Roosevelt is doing. He's saying, look, have a strong military so that you don't have to use it. And people will resort to treaties and talking and respect. That's how we get our way. Have a strong military, resort to negotiation. Now, how does the big stick work? Well, Roosevelt says, I love that cartoon. You guys got a problem? You tell me about it. Tell me your problems. Dressed up in his Rough Riders outfit. I love it. But it's called the Roosevelt Corollary, and basically what it is, it's an addition to the Monroe Doctrine. Roosevelt says it is our job to maintain the Western Hemisphere and keep foreign influence out. Yes, we're going to continue with the Monroe Doctrine. However, it may be necessary to intervene in Latin America in order to promote stability, to correct chronic wrongdoing. So, for instance, in Venezuela defaulted on a debt in 1902 that they owed money to Great Britain and Germany. Great Britain and Germany threatened to invade Venezuela in 1902. Roosevelt says, whoa, Nelly, you're not coming over here. No. Venezuela can't pay back its debt? Fine. We invaded Venezuela. We took over the Venezuelan government. We installed a guy who did our work, and we oversaw the payment of the debt back to Great Britain and Germany to keep them out. That's using the big stick. That's intervention. And between 1900 and 1914, we intervened in Venezuela, Haiti, Mexico, Guatemala, and Panama. I almost forgot to put Cuba in there, too. We had to intervene in Cuba. So, for instance, I'll take the best example of the big stick in action. Yeah, good. We're getting to that. Yes. Here's the big stick in action. Okay? We've had this idea of building a canal since the 1850s. Teddy Roosevelt says, we're going to build this canal. We're going to build it in Panama because that's where the French started building the canal back in the 1880s, and then they quit. What a shock, the French quit. Mainly because too many of their workers were dying from yellow fever and malaria. But since the Americans figured out that it was caused by mosquitoes, and that all you need to do is clean up the mosquitoes, we were now willing to step in and finish the job the French had started. The nation of Colombia, which owned Panama, said, we don't want Americans on our soil. So Teddy Roosevelt said, who is Colombia to stand in the way of human progress? This canal will benefit the entire world. Colombia, you are nothing. And the U.S. foments a rebellion in Panama. We get the Panamanians to rise up and declare independence from Colombia. And we go down there with the Navy. And Roosevelt says, we're here to help, whatever we can do to promote democracy to those poor, oppressed Panamanians. I mean, it's over in about a week. The U.S. recognizes Panama, and lo and behold, the first treaty that the Panamanian government signs is the Hay-Bonavaria Treaty that allows the United States to build and operate the Panama Canal. So Teddy Roosevelt could claim, while Congress dithered, I took the Panama Canal. That's the big stick in action. Colombia was standing in the way of human progress. Therefore, intervention was necessary. We've got the big stick here to, back us up. We take Panama. We get the canal built. Teddy Roosevelt also is keeping his eye on Japan. Remember, we had opened up Japan back in 1853. Matthew Perry had gone over at the behest of the Fillmore administration and opened up Japan. Japan had been, an agrarian society, a feudal society, and by 1900, it had the 5th largest navy in the world. It had modernized. It had industrialized. It was a rival to the United States in Asia. Teddy Roosevelt knew this. And he was concerned when the Japanese beat the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. There was a lot of surprise among the Americans and the Europeans that the Japanese were capable of beating a European power. They're too foreign to beat a European power, but they did. And they cleaned Russia's clock. Teddy Roosevelt, recognizing that if Japan wins this thing, they could get a lot of stuff in Asia, steps in and says, wait a minute, guys, I'll arbitrate this for you. I'll settle it for you. Roosevelt wins the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the war and getting the Treaty of Portsmouth signed. Portsmouth, New Hampshire. But what Roosevelt was really doing was he was checking the growth of Japan. He was trying to control and limit what Japan got. Because he did not want Japan being a rival to the United States. So what does Roosevelt do the year after the Treaty of Portsmouth is signed? He sends the Great White Fleet on a round-the-world goodwill tour. We paint the ships white, for peace. First stop, Tokyo Bay. Here comes the Great White Fleet. Hey, everybody in Tokyo, how you doing? Look at the guns on our battleships. Oh, don't they look good? They're nice and gleaming and brand new. And it only took us a couple of weeks to get here. Well, anyway, we're just stopping by to visit. We'll see you later, but don't worry. We can be back in a jiff. He's sending a message to the Japanese. You may think you're a big, powerful country in Asia, but don't get too big for your britches. And we're going to, and Japan signs a number of agreements with the United States because that's what friends do. Real nice like. Friends sign agreements. Like the gentleman's agreement where the Japanese agreed to cut off Japanese immigration to the United States. The Taft-Kitsura agreement where the United States and Japan agreed to respect each other's holdings. Japan is going to recognize America's right to have the Philippines. We're going to recognize Japan's right to control Korea. And the Takahira agreement. There's no accent marks in the Japanese language, so it's just all syllables that run together. Takahira agreement, where they're going to agree to honor the open door. Yeah, America, you can have access to Chinese markets. Yeah, Japan, you can have access to Chinese markets, because that's what friends do. Real nice like. don't think the Japanese aren't looking at the United States and thinking rival. The United States is looking at Japan and thinking rival. They're both competing for access in the same market. 30 years later, Pearl Harbor. It just come out of nowhere. It starts here. Now, William Howard Taft had a different approach. He believed in something called dollar diplomacy. We're not going to rely so much on our guns as we're going to rely on our wallets. And so what the United States did, oh, that's right, I bought a Butterfinger. So what the United States did was, instead of going in and threatening Latin American countries with guns or the Great White Fleet, we went in and said, here, we're going to put you on America's payroll. Here you go. Here's some money. Here you go. Here's some money. Now, we need you to protect America's pineapple business, sugar business, coffee business, vanilla business, and banana business. And what we wind up doing is we wind up propping up what become known as banana republics. It's not just high-end Gap or higher-end Old Navy. It literally is Latin American governments that are on America's payroll being run by dictators who are controlling their populations in order to promote American business. So we are going to prop up any unsavory dictator out there so long as they're on our payroll. And I know, this is a Franklin Roosevelt quote, so don't come complaining to me, people. Franklin Roosevelt had once said about a dictator that we were backing up, he may be a son of a bitch, but at least he's our son of a bitch. And that's the attitude that America takes. We're willing to look the other way when it comes to democracy. We're willing to look the other way when it comes to democracy, so long as our business interests are protected. The other guy involved in foreign policy is Woodrow Wilson, and we'll get more into Woodrow Wilson later on, but what you need to know is he applied morality to foreign policy. Not only are we going to protect American business interests around the globe, but we're going to go after evildoers. We're going to go after people who we think are bad. Like, for instance, Pancho Villa down in Mexico. He's a bad guy because he's attacking American towns in Arizona and New Mexico. So Woodrow Wilson's going to send the army into Mexico for 5 years to try to hunt this guy in and out of his hole. We're going to smoke him in and out of his hole.
47. Today is Thursday, February 20th.
We'll be right back.
Meeting. Please stand for your pledge of allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pancho Villa becomes kind of the Osama bin Laden of his day. He's like this terrorist who had been attacking American towns, and America's like semi-occupying Mexico to try to find him.
Super sweet culinary bullshit.
But why was Pancho Villa attacking the United States? Because we had intervened in a Mexican election because we didn't like the cut of the new president's jib. Wilson believed that the guy who had been elected, a guy by the name of Victoriano Huerta, was a generally bad dude. And we needed to do something to fix that. And so by intervening, Pancho Villa said, who's the United States to intervene in Mexico? How would you like it if I intervened in your country? And that's what he does. And he becomes kind of a folk hero in Mexico. By the way, we were in Mexico.
Congratulations to Southern's indoor track. Chelsea Watson got
for about
first place
4.5
in
years.
shot put.
We never
Chris
found Pancho Villa.
got second place in
Never
high
found
jump.
him.
Caleb Houghton got first place in pole vault.
But this
Congratulations
idea
to all
of
track
using
dogs. Good luck at
morality to determine foreign policy ventures. That's a very dangerous thing. When you start saying these are good and these are bad, that's a problem. And there have been very few presidents who've actually applied that measure of good and bad. Wilson is one.
The event is free and there will be door prizes. Go to eycfoundation.org for more information.
Jimmy Carter's another. And the
At
other
12,
guy,
we'll be meeting during Bulldog Block on Monday, February 24th.
George W. Bush.
Come and learn how to make yourself stand out to colleges.
There are 3 presidents in the 20th century who have applied morality to foreign policy, and each one of them have gotten us into trouble because they started playing good guys against bad guys.
And 16 different sweets, everything from brownies to cheesecake.
The difference is Woodrow Wilson was the president of Princeton University before he was president. George W. Bush was a straight C student and proud of it.
Starting during lunches, Tuesday, February 18th, and will also be available at the door.
All right.
It will be a tasty way to spend a winter Saturday. In celebration of